Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Afternoon Tune. I am doing another interview, this time with another indie comic creator, Chris Hill. How you doing there, Chris?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. It's kind of a busy Saturday already.
Really? How's it busy for you?
I have a martial arts class at like 10 in the morning, and I really don't want to wake up at like 9 to get ready for it and go. I got a haircut today,
Okay, let's
I'm
see.
sort of bouncing around.
All right, yeah, looking nice, looking fresh. Nice. Showed up for the interview, looking clean cut. You know what I mean? Pretty good. So you do martial arts, things like that, active like that.
Yeah, a little bit. I train in Japanese sword. I also have a bunch of other hobbies that are unrelated, but it's my 3 times a week, 2 hours a day sort of exercise to get out of the house and have something to do.
Oh, that's pretty nice. What other hobbies do you enjoy, interests, anything like that?
Um, I ferment miso in my backyard. I cook a lot. Yeah, I'm a little bit into cars where for a while there, like, I had a 67 Mustang that I had stripped down and I was going to rebuild. And then I left Texas and just had to sell everything. Um, and video games, of course.
Hmm.
Uh, kind of in and out of media where I was into the MCU for a while, but I have a good collection of Criterion Collection movies of a lot of old samurai movies because Zatoichi and stuff like that.
Oh, okay. So you got a nice wide range of hobbies and interests and kind of loves like that. So that's much appreciated. We'll
Yeah,
probably delve into that a little bit when discussing your comic. And your comic is titled Rapture Burgers. Is your
yes, yes,
comic.
it is.
And I get you reached out to me after I did the interview with another indie comic creator, Anthony Stokes. Do you two guys know each other as well? Uh,
Not really. I started following him pretty recently,
mhm.
and I started to kind of look around, like what indie podcasts are there that focus on like indie Kickstarters, indie comics, and in some cases specifically like with black hosts and things like that.
Okay.
And it sort of popped up, and I was like, oh yeah, I should check them out too.
Oh, nice.
Um,
Well, thank you. Thank you for reaching out. That was much appreciated. And I've been looking at your comic, which is very good. So the title, Rapture Burgers, and
yeah.
this let everybody know about the comic, about what it's all about, inspirations for it.
Yeah, so this came about. The original idea came about a long time ago, like almost 20 years ago by now, when a friend of mine and I were trying to do like a web comic. We were going to do like a 4 panel little gag strip, and you know, for the premise, there was a little bit of a joke that I was going to take over the world one day, so we ran with that. And over the years, we sort of evolved it and rewrote it and added a lot of details. And so at the core, it's about a high school student who just one day decides he's going to take over the world.
Mm.
And there's a lot more behind it. Like he hears a voice in his dreams that sort of hints to him that he's sort of destined to do something big. And yeah, so a lot of inspiration originally came from my own life, where Camille, the character, the main character, his personality was at first based on me in high school,
Mm.
and then quickly spiraled off into his own character. And like his best friend Sydney was based on my friend Adam, who was a co-writer. Which a lot of things start that way, where it's like, oh, it's the two of us, but we're in a comic, or I'm writing people that I know in comic form, and they became their own characters. They got their own backstories. Like the world got built out and got much bigger and more in depth. And then we paired up with an artist out here in California, Mimi Alves. And we did 3 volumes of like an American style graphic novel of Rapture Burgers. And we went on conventions, we did interviews, we did all that stuff.
Hmm.
And yeah, so it's been a while since we did those, and I took a break and went into like working with animation studios, pitching the comic as like a TV show. Um, just sort of bouncing around, like writing up other story pitches for animated shows. And eventually, I sort of came back around and was like, the original one wasn't quite done the way for many reasons. Like one of them being the writing because we were young.
Mm.
Yeah, it wasn't quite up to the level that I
And
would have
how old
liked.
were you when you first wrote the story?
Oof, that had to be. I mean, over the period of like 2004 to like 2012 was gestation period before we got a serious artist on it. And so that was like I started when I was 18 and just kept going from there.
Okay.
Early 20s, mid 20s, and there's some relics that were held in the original graphic novel versions here.
Mm.
And I'm like, it was very amateurish. It was very teenager of me, and some of the story planning wasn't quite there. So I felt like I wanted to redo this in a style that I really took a lot of inspiration from in the first place.
Mm.
And when I started working on this, Scott Pilgrim was kind of big, and Scott Pilgrim was an interesting mixture of it used screen tones. It was obviously video game and Japanese culture inspired,
Mm.
but it was from a Western creator with Western characters and everything like that.
Yeah.
And so that was some of the inspiration for the original. But the more I leaned into what kind of story do I want to tell and what level of detail do I want, the more I was like, yeah, it would be great if I could get a Japanese artist to work with me and I could do like manga style, just
Ah.
go all in on it.
Yeah. Because in
And
your comic, I say it's black and white. Very kind of, yeah, with even the main character, very manga inspired looking main character. Um,
yeah, and it's read, right to left because a little bit that's the Japanese artist doesn't understand American comics as well.
mm, okay. Oh, that's pretty nice. You mind if I pull up some pictures here from your
Yeah,
comic?
no, go for it.
Okay, so I'm gonna. This is from your Kickstarter right here. I'm gonna show some of the stuff here from your Kickstarter, by the way, that people can go support right now. Yeah, see a nice little character of Camille here. Yeah, see some of this art. Now, the design of Camille, is that inspired by any person?
I specifically, when we were doing his original character design, if you go all the way back to the original stuff, he's always had blue hair. He always had wings in his hair, and he never looked like me. He was never meant to look like me, and I don't know that there was a character or a person that he was specifically inspired to look like, but he's gone through several redesigns over the years, and where we landed now, I think anytime you work with an artist and you start redesigning characters, there's a little bit of their own influence and their own inspirations put into that design.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I see a little bit of like, maybe a little bit of like Full Metal Alchemist, but this artist also has their own original style that deviated from that a lot by the time we got to actually drawing pages.
Mm.
So it's not specifically based on anybody for appearance.
Mm. So when you guys were designing the characters, were you mainly just letting the artists kind of do their thing as far as that, or were you kind of offering ideas of like I kind of want this, I think I have this in mind for this the way this character should look, or did you just let the kind of
Yeah, it's funny because I can draw stick figures and that's the best I can do. So
right?
I can't offer much in the way of like artistic help. So for me, it was you should have blue hair because you got to have blue hair.
Mm.
That's about the amount of input that I gave, and even the wings in his hair came about as part of like a design process of it's like jamming on design of what about his hair? This would be interesting. Like what about this? And that was with like my youngest sibling. We worked together on that way back. And the original designs that we had were Camille, his best friend Sydney, and his ex-girlfriend Rose. Those were the three that we designed primarily, and
Mm.
just go all the way back.
Mm. Okay, it's pretty nice. So speaking kind of about your beginnings there, where'd you grow up, and what kind of
Oklahoma.
got you into writing there?
Yeah. So I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I recommend nobody go there. Uh,
Uh,
And in middle school, I hadn't thought about this until earlier today because it's been so long. But in middle school, I had small group of like fellow nerdy outcast friends. Because like by fifth grade or sixth grade, people at school called me computer brain,
mm,
and I was just known for being able to fix computers and being the nerdy person
mm,
um, who nobody really want to interact with. I had like a small group of friends, like three or four of us, and we would draw little comics in class about a pimp named Big Daddy, and with little weird cartoony versions of ourselves in them. We just doodle and draw and pass the notebook back and forth. And I think that's just lost to time at this point. I haven't seen those since like middle school.
mm,
So that was like the original thing that I had started to sort of write or sort of do a comic type of thing with.
mm.
And then in high school, I had a senior project that was write a children's book that incorporates parts of your heritage. And at the time, what I was told, and I think this is true for a lot of sort of mixed people, is, you're like black and Native American and white. And I'm like, sure, I'll roll with that.
Okay.
So I wrote We Want the Funk, a Choctaw story.
Mm,
And that was my senior project. And it was, had friends from the internet draw little pictures of things. And it was really dumb and silly. And my teacher, I think, just sort of like, I don't get any of this. You get a B. That's good enough. I still have that sitting around here somewhere, and it's like not well written, but it's sort of silly and fun. Uh, but then, years later, we were like, hey, webcomics are real big. That VG Cats, that Penny Arcade, all those
mm.
really big webcomics at the height of webcomics. And, just kicking around the idea of like a funny thing to do. And somewhere around that time, I had also um, started writing into a text file on my desktop, the ending for a story. And I didn't know the beginning, I didn't know the middle. I just knew it ends this way, and it has these two characters based on myself and like this particular person. And that sat around for years, and I would revisit it, I would add bits to it. And it wasn't until much later when we were already starting to work on Rapture Burgers as like web comic that I connected the dots and was like, okay, yeah, that's the story. That's how the story starts, and I'll make my way to that ending somehow.
Hmm.
Uh, so it was sort of a weird progressive thing, and for a long time I didn't consider myself a writer at all. I was like, no, I write a comic, but I'm not a writer.
And
Thing I do.
where are you staying now?
I'm in like L.A.
L.A. Oh, okay, nice. And
I was
with oh, go ahead.
yeah, I was in Dallas for a little while as well. It seems like a number of people are from Dallas lately.
Yeah. Is it kind of like you see a lot of people migrating from California to Texas, and then people from Texas to California? Is that what's kind of going on
For
right
me, it was Escape from Oklahoma first,
now? Yeah.
and then Texas was fine. But my day job is like I work in tech as like a systems engineer, or I can software engineer now. Right. Um, Dallas is pretty good for tech, but LA area is even better for tech. So I sort of migrated my way over.
Okay.
And obviously with the idea of like by that point really wanted to work on Rapture Burgers as like a graphic novel comic, and I wasn't finding anybody I could work with there. So of course I was like, well, LA, California, there's more entertainment related things. And of course it worked out. I did find an artist here who, I worked with for like 6 years on Rapture Burgers graphic novels.
Nice. And you specifically chose webcomic because you think that was kind of easier, more easier to get into, and it was kind of more popular, you think, than just doing it right?
Um, but we did submit to publishers originally. And, it was with my siblings art that was very, 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 very rough. And so we submitted to like Dark Horse and Oni Press or anybody who would take it. And of course we got rejected by all of them. And I realize now that put into words, my feeling is I don't want to ask permission to tell my story. If I have a story I want to tell, I'm just going to find a way to tell it. And so it became more like that of like, I'm not going to ask permission. I'm not going to keep submitting packets in hopes that they'll let me make the story I want to make. So I just sort of went full steam and was like, I'll finance it out of my own pocket. Find an artist. We'll just work on it. We'll post it up to the internet, and then I'll compile it into books. So I went through the whole process of like finding a book manufacturer, doing all the technical parts of it, like numbering pages, and getting it printed, and then selling at conventions.
Yeah, that's very interesting that you say that. You know what I mean? You didn't want to be beholden to another person to have access to whether or not of your dream. Your work and your passion. And now, I mean, nowadays you can really have a lot of people, creators, who have so many different avenues to create and to post their stuff online. And have all that now. So it seems like it's way easier than it ever was ever before. It seems
Yeah,
like.
it's really a different market because I think a lot of the webcomic folks became the indie comics community that we have now, just on account of, well, you have Webtoon, or there used to be a couple of other aggregator sites that even I tried to use, but I think it has become easier now with social media. You can build your own following. You don't have to go to conventions around the country to try to build people, who'll buy your stuff or who'll read it. And that's even advice that I got from another independent publisher of, I mean, think about it. If you go to conventions, maybe you sell 100 books if you're lucky. You have to cover the cost of traveling to the convention, the stay, the cost of the convention itself, the book printing, all that stuff.
Right.
Now you have access to people directly through social media and crowdfunding sites. So it is really a much better market now than it used to be.
Yeah. And for you being an indie creator, how is it? How is it, growing a fan base? How is it going to these conventions? How is that?
Yeah, so I took a break from conventions for a long time when I didn't have anything to sell. When I was like working on animation, when I was trying to pitch stuff, there wasn't really a reason for me to go to conventions. Also because a very important part of being an indie creator and selling your comics and stuff is to be very confident in your product and be able to like sell it to people very confidently. And unfortunately, I sort of lost confidence in the version of the comic that I had, because I just started to see the like, we were young. There are a lot of mistakes. There's little things that I want to fix, but now it's like it's a little too late. It starts off really rough. But in the last year or so, I mean, the last couple of years, I've spent really ramping up with the new artist and redoing designs, trying to make a pipeline where we can make pages like reliably and an assistant to come on, all that stuff. Just like preparing, getting art made, getting promo art made. So I'm starting to try to get back into the loop of, we're going to go to conventions again, and we're going to be more active on social media. We're going to try to build that fan base to get people interested in what we're selling. And originally for me, it was like I had a very bad first day at my first convention ever when I was exhibiting, because I just sat at my table with stacks of books in front of me, hoping that people would notice me and that people would come by and look at it, and they didn't. So with a little advice from some of the other indie folks, it was like, no, you got to stand up, you got to interact with people. And to me, that naturally turned into like carnival barking at people, like, hey, do you work like World Domination? Do you like Pinky and the Brain? That sort of stuff. And it got people's attention. And then we also figured out, hand them a book immediately. Make them flip through it, or don't make them, but like let them flip through it and talk
All
to
right.
them while they're looking through it. And that's how we got people to come back like year after year, and like who were willing to come back and talk to us, or were like, oh yeah, I came back for the second volume this time.
Oh, nice.
Um, and which is I'm much better in person than I am online, because very impersonal online, and you're just like throwing it into the void, hoping somebody notices,
All right.
like trying to put out a hot take that people notice or something. And I'm like, nobody responds to well reasoned sort of neutral takes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of what being online is. Yeah, very much. You have to have one extreme kind of opinion on on either side. There it seems like to really get attention. Yeah, so kind of growing up, were you kind of a big comic reader or manga reader
Um,
or?
yeah, it's funny. We were very poor growing up, and the only comics that I got to read when I was really young were the hand-me-downs from our youth pastor or something like that.
Hmm.
We didn't even go to church anymore, but we were still family friends with the youth pastor. But he would give us like X-Men comics and just whatever he had in his little chest that he was willing to part with. And so we watched like the X-Men animated TV series, the Spider-Man animated TV series. And then as I got into like middle school, my brother, who's like a year and a half older than me, was in, it's called Demolay. It's some sort of like fraternity thing that was just sort of open. He went to that with some older folks who were like, in their early 20s or late teens. And those were really the people who were into Japanese stuff at that time because it was still very niche, little underground. Dragon Ball Z was on TV.
Right.
But like the kids at my school didn't know that was Japanese. They were just like, "Hey, yo, did you see that Dragon Ball Z?" And I was like, that's Japanese, right?"
Right.
Um, but of course, that was like one of the gateways. That and Gundam Wing. Some of those friends that my brother was hanging out with in that little fraternity were like, "Oh, hey, here's a CD with all the rest of the Dragon Ball Z episodes subtitled in real media format." They're like, "Really?" So, like we watched ahead years before it was aired on American TV. We just sort of learned to deal with the subtitles, and we sort of branched off from there and found out like, so Encore has this action channel where they air like late night anime stuff that they can't air during the day, and like Cartoon Network can't show. And so we started to veer a lot more towards that side. And as I got a little older, I got over the anime only type thing and started to read manga as well, and started to get an appreciation for that. But pretty much at that point, like I stopped reading American comics. There were very few things that would get through. Like obviously Scott Pilgrim got through. I read a bunch of The Walking Dead and was honestly like, I don't get it. Um,
You
but
said you said you didn't get it, or you said, or?
yeah, yeah, like I read it and I was like, all right. I mean, it's like an Eternal Zombie movie, but why is it so popular? It was,
Okay.
it's a little bit me being on the outside, like, and I watched the TV show for a long time too, and I actually liked the TV show more because it fleshed out the characters a bit more
Oh,
until later seasons. Basically, up until the point where Glenn got killed, I had watched it, and then I was like, all right, I'm out. I'm done. I just not interested anymore.
okay. So with the manga and then reading comics, do you think there's like a major difference in reading both those mediums? Do you see that there's one kind of better or one kind of that's worse or?
I think they're just different and have different aims, and especially working with like a trained manga artist who lives in Japan and is from Japan and likes to read Japanese media. There's a different appreciation for like, oh, okay, so from your point of view, American comics panels are like a still frame from a movie, and this is talking to the artist that I'm working with. But manga, on the other hand, is supposed to convey more momentum, and like the sound effects that are there and everything convey a lot more things in the panel that are shortcuts, is what it really is. They're like, why is there a sound effect for staring at somebody? So you know that they're staring. That's why. Um, and so it's just a little different, but it's also obviously we have the big two in America for comics, and they sort of dominate the market for American comics. But then you get Image, and they're American comics, just like manga. They go through trends, and for a long time, my thing was noticing that like, oh, it seems like with American comics, monsters capes are what's really big. Some sort of gory violence with zombies or vampires or something like that. For a minute, that was what was like big, big, big. And but manga is doing a similar thing where they're like they call it isekai, which is another world. There's so many stories about somebody getting sent to some video gamey fantasy world, and I just can't be bothered with that stuff either. So I think there's similarities, and there's a lot of differences where like manga what we get in the West and what people like in the West tends to be aimed at young boys, and it's fighting, 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 like Dragon Ball and Demon Slayer and all that.
Hmm.
Manga is such a wide variety of different kinds of stories that are successful, that do really well, and they're just commonly available. And I sort of appreciate that. Um, but I also understand that like the indie comics market, because I interact with the indie comics market, there's also a variety of different stories if you seek them out. So then it's just sort of down to like, have you learned to sort of, I won't say tolerate, but appreciate the cultural aspect of like manga versus American comics? Because there's like a barrier a little bit sometimes where you're like, I don't, why? Like, why do they do these things in like manga and anime and stuff like that? And, you know, some people are like, I don't like the high pitched voices that they use, or I don't like the sort of silly fan service, or, you know, I don't like the fighting power up, suddenly magical sword type stuff. So, no, I think it's a matter of taste, and
Yeah.
I could point fingers at either one and say it's lazy storytelling, or you're just rehashing the same story that's been told 100 times. Because it's what sells. It's what people like.
Yeah. And with kind of a lot of manga, a lot of comics being kind of gotten way bigger now, of course, over the time, due to, like I said, the two big companies, geek medium seems to be the new thing that, a lot of Hollywood and, major things that air, film productions, TV productions, you always see that. Do you see that kind of reflected in manga or comic, kind of interest as far as people who, like, as these things are getting more popular in movie and TV, do you see that kind of come back to manga comics at all?
I think, I think specifically if you're watching like Demon Slayer or Attack on Titan, knowing, so this is one of those major differences is that manga tends to be like one long self-contained story without all the crossovers and stuff like that. So it's a little easier to just pick up One Piece and read One Piece all the way through, even though that's such a long series. But like Demon Slayer, you can pick it up at volume one, and all you have to do is read the rest of the volumes, and you're done.
All right.
And so I think there's a barrier with the American comics of, even if it's not as true anymore, there is the image that if I pick up Batman number one, am I gonna like have to read like a different Batman series, or how long will this continue, or are there crossovers? Like, if I want to read Avengers, like which Avengers, like which
Yeah.
version of the Avengers do I read?
Which run? Who wrote them the best? Yeah, things like that.
Yeah, and so I think if you're watching something like Demon Slayer, like if you watch the anime version, you know that you can just go to the source material and just read it all the way through, and get past where they have animated, because it takes a long time to animate stuff. And so that is seen a lot. There are, um, there's charts and statistics about, well, this anime series just premiered and the manga sales tripled, or quadrupled, or something like that. And so you see a very direct correlation. People watched it and they liked it, and they went back and read it because they want to get ahead of everybody else, or they want to read the rest of the story.
Right. And you just don't see that reflection in American comics because if they kind of doing an adaptation, like with some of these kind of things, like they'll do adaptations of stories that have already been done, but it's kind of hard to maybe go and find that particular run and then just see where it ends.
Yeah,
And
like
yeah,
Multiverse of Madness is one where you're like, I assume that it picks from the comics, but I have no idea where I would start to like, if I'm just like, I want more multiverse shenanigans with Doctor Strange specifically. I would have to go ask somebody or look at a wiki. I mean, many people have commented that American comics just sort of have that problem of not being quite as easy to just pick up and get into.
yeah. And with your kind of webcomic, the reason I ask that is I want to see if that trickle down effect comes to indie creators, webcomics, of people who are looking for the new thing that's maybe going to pop off in situations like that. Do you see that kind of reflected there in people,
No,
search?
I think the problem is like most of the people that I've known in the truly indie comic space, like Image could be considered an independent company because it is independent. But they now have the marketing resources and like, the Robert Kirkman behind them that they can make something new and get it picked up and have a bunch of people go, oh, Oh, that next thing from Robert Kirkman. All right, I'm going to read that.
Right.
But like truly indie creators don't really have that reputation or the name to get people. To me, the hardest part is convincing people to be interested in something they've never heard of from somebody they've never heard of.
Right.
Like, there's so many layers of difficulty to get through to convince somebody like you should read this. This is originally I didn't like the idea of drawing comparisons to something else because you want your story to stand on its own. You want it to be unique. At the end of the day, people don't react to this totally original idea that I can't compare to anything else. What they want to hear is it's like Pinky and the Brain if Pinky were in charge. And they're
Mm.
like, oh, yeah, I know Pinky and the Brain. All right, I'll check it out.
Mm.
And that's sort of what we landed on for Rapture Burgers. Like, it's kind of like Pinky and the Brain if Pinky were in charge. Like, if a manic, crazy person was at the reins of the world domination game. Um, but it's, I think probably what's happened is that there are more people who show up at conventions now
Yeah.
because all of the conventions have become general pop culture, basically.
Yeah.
So, like, I used to exhibit at Kamikaze, which became LA Comic Con. And, obviously we have, like, Anime Expo, which is huge. Even that, like, it's games. There are Western stuff that comes out, but, like, also San Diego Comic Con became the place where huge media companies premiered their new thing, had panel interviews. I think it brings more, like, boots to the ground that you're standing on, but does it make them interested in, like, really indie stuff? I don't think so.
Mm. Yeah. And I was talking with kind of Anthony Stokes in the interview about what it's like being an indie creator and do people really want to support it. And he said, "Fuck no." He said,
Yeah.
he said that. Yeah, but he said it kind of needs a kind of a triple up effect of if people talk about wanting more original content in media, they need to kind of start more from the ground up and support more indie creators. Do you agree with that message of people need to kind of do that if they complained about not lacking original content and
Yeah, and I mean, there's multiple levels of that, of people who complain about, well, we want more black characters, we want more black superhero characters, we want more characters of this specific kind of diversity that we're interested in.
mm,
And you could have an indie creator going like, I got a book right here that's got all that. They're like, yeah, but you're not like Marvel, DC, Image. It doesn't feature Batman. I mean, I want Batman to be black. Like that's the sort of level that we're at now, where I think we're sort of agree with them that people don't really want to support indie stuff. It's such an uphill battle, and you just have to talk. And you're a salesperson. You're trying to romance them into just give it a chance, man.
right.
It's $15. Just check it out. Maybe you'll like it. Maybe you won't like it. Just and I always try to. I'm one of those people that's like, really want to beg people to like my stuff. I
Right.
don't want to be like throwing books at people to like just take it. Um, so it's almost like there's a pride that you have to get over of like you got to be shameless. You just got to shamelessly advertise. You got to call out to those people. You got to pull them in. I was next to an indie comics person who was like, "This is the best thing you'll ever read. It'll like do X number of things for you." And I was like, "That's a hard sell, man. You're promising a lot there." But I was like, "You know what? All right, so am I. You know what? It's the best thing you'll ever read."
Mm.
Um, and maybe I sell a couple that way, but it's it's really tough. Like, so I agree. Like, people aren't really out there marching to say, "Let's go support all the indie creators." They want what's familiar. They want the like shiny, polished thing that's given to them. And it's really interesting because like the manga market, some of the things that become popular given a chance in like Shonen Jump, which is like one of the biggest magazines in Japan. And some of them just get canceled because they don't like catch on like fire, but some of them are, oh, this little rom-com about a guy who like paints doll faces and stuff like that. It becomes super duper popular and like the sales quadruple. It's like an original story, and I'm like, why can't we get that kind of support?
Mm.
And a lot of Americans and Westerners will start to follow it because of word of mouth, because people on the internet, on Reddit or 4chan or wherever, will just start saying like, this is super cute, and it's hard to get that kind of groundswell as indie creators, I think.
Yeah. And having a community, how's the kind of indie community been to you, indie comic community?
Um, yeah, I think generally, I'll say this, generally supportive. I don't think there's anybody in the indie community who will say, give up, stop trying. Why would you make this? Nobody's that rude that I've ever met. But they may, around Kickstarter specifically, Stokes has even posted like, is it important to you to see that an indie creator has supported a lot of other projects on Kickstarter? And some people said yes, just flat out yes. And others say like, no, it could be a different account, or why is this a pay to play game? Like somebody comes in with a new comic that they put together, and because they haven't supported 100 other indie comics already, you just going to ignore them and say you didn't pay your dues. So I'm starting to see a little bit of that, where I'm like, doesn't seem right. But like at the convention space, generally supportive. Like you could ask for advice. If an indie creator got picked up by a publisher, they're happy to tell you, like, this is what we did. We put together like a physical box, or you should go do the portfolio reviews. I think it's friendly, but it doesn't necessarily mean. See, this is the other part I understand is you're putting a lot of time and energy and money into making your own thing. You don't necessarily have spare money to just go like, I'm gonna fund every indie creator that I can. You're like, I'm trying to make a thing too and put it out into the world. So I at least am understanding of that, and so I don't expect other indie creators to all line up like, there's 50 of you. I talk to all of you. You have to buy my book. I'm like, maybe it's not your thing. Maybe it's not the kind of story that you like. It's fine. Like I'm fine with that.
And in the community, do you all kind of QC your work? Do you like, kind of trade back and forth and go like, well, maybe you need to touch up here? I mean, do you have like a person who does that for you, or somebody in the
That's the part
community?
that I would say. So there are some communities on Facebook. There's like a coffee and comics community in LA that gets together, draw together and stuff like that. But I haven't seen as much of that because unless you specifically ask for feedback, which a lot of us don't, um, I don't think people volunteer like, your lettering's not that great. You should hire a letterer. Because I think everybody knows that these are like near and dear to everybody's heart, and you may like hurt their feelings if you're like, I wouldn't pay that much for an artist, or you know. I got a little bit of that kind of feedback when I asked for it, but definitely not unsolicited. And um, like the QC part, for me, what I did was I sent it to a number of friends who don't do comics. And because for me, what I wanted to know was, are there any typos? Does the dialogue sound stupid or like something that you don't like? And what do you like this art? Or because sometimes I'm like, I could name like 50 mistakes in there, but did you notice them? Right, cool.
And so, when you're trying to get the feedback, you mostly give it to kind of friends or, people you already kind of know, and then kind of send it to them and they kind of get back to you, basically.
Yeah, I try to get some external eyes that aren't in comics, and it's to me it's a little similar to like movie studios. If you go to movies in LA, there will regularly be a guy standing out there like, "Hey, free screening, free screening." And if you tell them I work in the film industry, they're like, never mind, because they don't want your like technical perspective as somebody who works in the industry. They want the perspective of an outside person who just doesn't have a bias or a strong knowledge. Because this is the other thing, is that who is your audience? Is your audience other indie creators, or is it like people who don't make comics or people who like comics like this? For me, I feel like it's more, I want to appeal to people who just sort of like these kinds of stories and these comics, not necessarily sell to other indie people.
And the audience that you're trying to get with your story, who do you think, like your audience age range, or do you think you have that, or do you think what's the audience of people you're looking for with your story?
Yeah, so I think we sort of geared to a little bit young adults, so teen, the early 20s, and it's kind of now, especially that we've retooled it for people who sort of like sci-fi and comedy. And the funny thing is, it took us a minute, but I was like, Gintama is very popular and is technically a sci-fi comedy manga. And we have a little bit of a similar vibe going there. But it's also, I can't say generally for people who like manga and stuff because that's a very broad group of people who like very different things.
What?
I do think people who sort of like sort of lighthearted stories that become much more serious and interesting and sort of sprawling adventures and things like that.
Okay. And you mentioned like being in LA, possibly turning it into a series. If it, you know, do you still try to do that? Like pitch it, maybe potentially turning it into a series. If it does turn into a
Yeah,
series, would you
so
want it to be animated or?
absolutely animated. I cannot imagine a version that's live action. That would be weird. So I worked with an animation studio for a couple years. First, I started out with I want to make like a minute and a half worth of animation that's like an opening sequence. And then that turned into 5 minutes, and then that turned into a 30-minute pilot. And we actually got an animatic done for 24 minutes, technically, pilot. And, you know, we got some voice actors on. One of them was notable, but technically I can't say who he is because his agent would get mad at him. We got an animatic put together, but it was a little bit working with the studio and working on the script. It got pushed in directions that I didn't really like, and it became a little bit of a mess because it was like the big story that isn't just about a kid trying to take over the world. It's like different groups that are like in the wasteland. It's post-apocalyptic. You know, there's a time skip. There's a lot of things happen, and then there's like another side of the story about it gets a lot more complicated, but the easiest entry point is like the kid trying to take over the world and it spirals out of control. Ended up at a place where it didn't get fully animated. We had segments that were animated and then the rest of it was animatic. It was like animated line art and sketchy stuff, but just wasn't finished. But we tried to pitch that around, and like the people that we were getting connected to, like short film people or indie film people for live action stuff, and they're like, I don't even know where to start with animation. Like, I don't even know who to talk to. So eventually, I hooked up with an animation producer and stopped working on like the animatic part of it and started reworking the script, getting new art made. And we did end up pitching it to like Warner Brothers a couple different times. And, you know, then we developed some other concepts that we also pitched and are still trying to pitch. So, you know, it's still sort of an ongoing thing, but it's sometimes, especially in entertainment, the passion project is your second project or your third project because maybe this is a little complicated to try to sell as an animated show off the bat. Maybe we work on like an animated comedy or a kids show or something like that. So it's been strategically finding the thing that you know will allow me to make Rapture Burgers eventually into an animated show.
And the animation style, was it an anime style or what animation
Um,
style was it in?
yeah, so this was before I started working with Pepper, the Japanese artist. So the animation studio was an American studio, and we kind of reworked the original graphic novel style into a style that was easy enough to animate. And I heard somebody describe it as Nickelodeon grown up a little bit.
Okay.
The heads were still a little squarish, and you know the limbs were kind of skinny and noodly for the most part. So it was more of an American style. And this a little bit goes back to like if you understand the scope of the story and what I'm trying to do with it, animation style might not work. There's a limitation. For example, watching BoJack Horseman, there was a point in that show, like most of the show, the animation style fit perfectly. It all worked. There's a point where Todd had like whales or something or some crazy scheme where I was watching. I was like, this doesn't work for this animation style. Like you guys are trying to do too much with a simplistic style, and you're sort of losing me because I feel like it just doesn't have the impact that you want it to have.
Mm.
So I was sort of feeling that way about like things that I want to do with this. This doesn't really match. Like the least I would want to do like a Warner Brothers Harley Quinn or the way they do like the DC animated movies. Like that would be a style that works.
Okay. Yeah,
Um,
that's a great style. Yeah, and the Harley Quinn animated series. I mean, that style is very, very expressive animated wise,
yeah.
with a lot of the characters and other things like that. Very bright. Look, it looks like a kids show, for little kids, but kind of when you watch the show, definitely not as for little kids,
No,
for
no, it's
sure.
definitely not.
For sure. So you think the best way probably is just to work your way in the industry and then try to get some clout that way, and then doing some other people's projects, and then maybe funnel that into getting your own project done.
Oh, well, I was still trying to sell my own original projects. They were just easier to sell projects,
Ah, okay.
at least in theory, because an episodic animated family comedy is probably easier to sell than like a serialized story that's gonna take multiple seasons to tell.
Yeah. And you mentioned Pepper, who's the illustrator here. You also have other people that you also mentioned who are part of the big team. I'm going to pull it up right quick on your Kickstarter there. Give them some good attention as well. You have Adam, who's the co-writer. You have Mimi, who's the manga assistant here. And you also have Rachel, who's the visual consultant, and immoral support.
Moral support, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So nice big team people. How did you come in contact with these people here? How did you find them?
Yeah, so Pepper, I met through it's a site called Skillots that is specifically for foreigners to contact Japanese creative type people, basically one-off contracts. And technically, you're not supposed to contact them outside of that site, but what are you gonna do? So I met Pepper that way, and I had put a posting up to say, "Hey, I want to do a long-term manga project, but first I want you to do test pages or draw these two characters in your style." The two characters were Camille and Alex, who were like two of the main characters, and a few people sent me back very their version of American style, and one of them looked like emoji sort of thing. One of them was very just a little unusual, but her was the one who sort of hit the nail on the head, and I was like, that's what I want. And so we've been working together since. And only recently did Mimi come on as the assistant in the last like 3 or 4 months. And like Mimi's been doing, learning how to do screen tones, how to do black tones. It's also good at 3D work to help us out with backgrounds, to give us something to like trace over or go based on. Adam, I've known since high school, and he's been on it since the beginning. And Rachel was actually a supervising art director on Multiverse of Madness, and she did Shang-Chi and also No Way Home. So she's knee
Oh,
deep, was knee deep in Marvel stuff for a while there. And met years ago on the interwebs, of course. Also, just I was going to a lot of sort of networking events for people trying to break into the industry or for like small Sundance film type things, and so I was meeting like small time producers and occasionally an actor or something like that. But probably the more substantial one out of all of that was like eventually. Actually, before that, I met Rachel. Anyway, yeah. So we've sort of woven the team together to try to make it the best version that we can this time. Like I learned so much about lettering and book layout since the first ones that I'm like, oh no, this is going to be much, much, much better.
So all that experience you starting when you were 18 really helped, learning trial and error. Everything has really, really improved upon and really sharpened your skills over the course of that time.
And I mean, we did 3 volumes of the American style graphic novel, and from the first volume to the second volume, there's a drastic difference. And even getting into the third volume, there's a noticeable difference of our original artist, Mimi Alves, sort of grew with it, and you can see it happening, but also like the writing got better. We started to weave in more foreshadowing. We started to think about the bigger story. Like our first volume is just like high school shenanigans, Camille coming to terms with the breakup and, trying to conquer his high school science fair and stuff like that, which was good. It was a good small place for us to start because starting out, we didn't feel like we could tell a serious story. We felt like we want to tell it sort of a humorous, jokey, non-serious story and ease our way into something more serious. And so our original version of this sort of eased its way into, and now we're telling something a little more serious. And now, like, here's some hardcore, deep backstory for Camille and sort of the tragic history of his parents and stuff like that. So we grew into it, and it got better as we went. And now I'm like, let's go back to the beginning with all of that experience and knowledge and make it better.
What would you say is the hardest part of your journey as a writer, and what would you say is the most joyous part of it?
Hardest part is definitely marketing and selling stuff. Like I can make the comic all day, but it's getting out there and getting people interested and chucking books. It's hard work, and it's the thing that I am least naturally inclined to do. I'm more of an introvert, and I'm more of a like. I can write technical backstory. I can supervise pages getting done. I can crank out scripts. Man, marketing. It's the hardest part.
Joyous part, most joyous part. What would you say that
The
is?
joyous part is like seeing, because I'm not an artist, seeing the thing that I wrote in the world that I'm trying to build exist on page, and like getting these physical copies. I was like, ah, yes, this is the thing that I made. I have something to show for this. Um, I think, and I said this in a different interview where I'm like, to me, success is making the thing. I want to make the thing and hold it in my hands and be able to read it myself. And then I'm like, yes. And then the next part is having to sell it.
Yeah, and I gotta give myself a physical copy of that. How do people get a physical copy of your book?
Yeah. So on our Kickstarter, for this new version, there are multiple tiers. There's digital copy. There's a softback physical copy. There's then a hardbound physical copy that we're planning to do. And if you go really crazy, there's also you can have an interview with the whole team, including Pepper and Rachel. And Rachel again worked on a number of MCU projects and has some interesting stories to tell about that.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
but we're also doing other things like posters, stickers, really high tiers like custom fast food t-shirt, not t-shirts, but like sort of button-down shirt that you would have to wear at McDonald's or something like that, but custom designed for Rapture Burgers,
Okay.
and baseball caps and stuff like that.
So you
So
got some
we're
Rapture Burger merch and things like that.
yeah, some embroidered patches too.
Ah,
Um,
okay. That's
we're
pretty
sort of
cool.
leaning into it.
Ah, nice, nice, nice. So that's a lot of great stuff. I mean, she doesn't. Rachel doesn't get in trouble if telling stories. She doesn't have Kevin
I
Feige
think.
sniper rifle on her head, the red dot, anything like that. Nothing.
Well, if the project is still ongoing before release, yes. They sign NDAs to not talk about that stuff. But after it's released, it's sort of like doing talking about like, oh well, what was it like working on Multiverse of Madness, and what are some fun stories that you're allowed to tell about it? Because there's some stuff just about like, oh, that one scene about the musical fight. I designed the musical notes for that. She did.
Oh, okay. That's really cool. Yeah. I thought that was one of the best parts of the movie, the musical fight. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and there's the story about how that came about, even that I'm pretty sure she's allowed to tell now, but that's to her discretion.
Oh, nice. So what do you anything you're interested in right now? You know what I mean? Reading or watching on television or movies?
Um, man, Atlanta, we've been watching.
Oh, it's
Um,
funny you mentioned that. We're going to do a season review of Atlanta after this interview. I'm going to do that. Somebody.
oh, that's fun. Yeah. Atlanta this season has been interesting because I'm like, oh, every other episode is like an anthology episode based in Atlanta, just so we still know the show's Atlanta for a reason, right? It's called
Right.
Atlanta for a reason.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, it's a fun show. It's I think I've maybe laughed out loud maybe twice at it, but it's still an entertaining, really fun show to watch. And I think it got categorized as comedy. Honestly, I think it was like a Trojan horse sort of thing of like, yeah, it's totally a comedy. It's totally a comedy. It's not like a bizarre, heightened reality, sort of drama.
Yeah. Sci-fi, horror, thriller type
Yeah.
show. Yeah. Lynchian,
And
type thing.
for me, I'm like, exactly. That's the sort of thing that I want to do is like not be bound by a specific genre or anything, just to be able to weird shit sometimes.
Yeah. Is that kind of, what I mean, does that inspire you seeing kind of great shows like that, like Atlanta, to continue to
It
create
sort
more?
of says that there is a space for that and people will follow you on that journey of being a little weird and a little unexpected as long as it's the storytelling is good.
Yeah.
Um, that is to me inspiring to see and hopeful that we get more TV like that.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to think of. I mean, lately it's all been about the Kickstarter, like trying to be on Twitter, promoing, trying to get on podcasts, and so some of my hobbies I've just been like, all right, I'm ignoring that for now.
So you've been really, I was going to ask you, like, you've been really mainly focused on your work. Do you have time for much else? You know what I mean? For, much else, like watching other content or media or, hobbies yourself. But you said got martial arts class tomorrow, 10 a.m. So, yeah.
Uh, Martial arts class. I also have Japanese lessons 4 times a week, and I have a day job, of course, that's full time.
Wow.
Um, then like supervising Rapture Burgers being made because we have like a Discord server where we're like working together. Um, and then lately we've been going to a lot of plays in town. Like we saw Tambo and Bones recently, which is by a black playwright about two black characters who realize they're stuck in a minstrel show and
Interesting.
sort of break their way out of it. And it's a really interesting, also very weird. I don't want to spoil it, but it ends in white genocide, which is
Oh,
like okay, that's a bold choice.
oh, well, okay, wow. I think that's the last thing white people want to hear right now. Honestly,
Yeah, I was like, sure, that's what you want to do. But, all right.
yeah. Yeah, well, I'm really glad you sought me out, and you asked to come on the show. Really, I think it was a pleasure talking to you. Always great to talk to a lot of kind of creators. Come on the show. I've interviewed some different people now, from musicians to athletes to indie
Oh
comic
yeah.
creators. So it's great to have a wide range of people like that. Helps me out. And I'm always glad to be supporting kind of indie people like that. I'm going to be donating to your Kickstarter this upcoming week as
I
well.
appreciate it.
And I'm going to be updating. I'm going to pay for the physical copy. I want to get that physical copy in my hands, show it up, hold it up, have just a stack of
Yeah.
those kind of books like that. So let everybody know about you, man, and about your Kickstarter. Where can people find you? All your information, all your links, stuff like that.
Thanks for having me on. It's like learning to ride a bike again, doing these kinds of interviews and stuff. But it's good to be able to talk about it because like I said, Twitter's not like my forte. I'm much better in person. I'm much better if you ask me questions.
Nice. So you can go to your Twitter. Just it's Rapture Burger. I'm gonna pull up your Twitter right here. Just
Pretty much all my socials are at Rapture Burgers, which is very convenient.
so you're on Twitter, Instagram. You're on TikTok. You're
Nope.
TikToking, doing that.
I'm not TikTok yet. Nah.
Okay.
Nah.
All right. So, but yeah, people if they go to Twitter, they just type in Rapture Burger. Your link to your Kickstarter will be there in your bio, and everything like that. Well, hey man, thank you for coming on. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, man. Have a good one.
Too.